Changing Cultures in Humankind. So in Humankind by Amplitude Studios, you start in control of a nomadic tribe and slowly work your way into becoming a full-fledged civilization. On the way, you go through various eras, the Neolithic, the Ancient Era, the Classical Era, etc. As you progress through the eras, you have a choice to make. You choose which culture you want to take for that particular era. For example, as you progress from a Neolithic hunter-gatherer tribe to the Ancient Era, you can choose the Assyrians or the Hittites, amongst others. When you progress to the Classical Era, you can choose from cultures like the Achaemenid Persians. These cultures are from very diverse historical culture groups. For example, if you choose the Zhou culture for the Ancient Era, the soundtrack becomes Chinese-themed, and you get Zhou bonuses for your civilization. Very cool. However, when you progress to the Classical Era, you can choose the Achaemenid Persians, and your culture and the aesthetic of the game changes accordingly. This is quite jarring. I recently made a sort of impressions video that didn't delve into every aspect of humankind, but I did speak about this issue and I wanted to make a separate video about it as well. In that video, I mentioned this issue and stated that I felt that the choice of which culture you want when you progress eras should be somewhat limited by your choices as you play through the game. Were you expansive? Were you warlike or aggressive? Were you peaceful? Were you focused on the economy and infrastructure? These actions I felt should have some impact on the culture you develop. I wanted to add something here. I feel like your choice of culture for the previous era should also have an impact on what culture you can choose in the following era. One of the greatest aspects of the civilization games is the natural feeling of progression as you lead your unique civilization through the ages and progress scientifically, culturally, and militarily. In Humankind, choosing a culture like the Zhou in this example, and then progressing to the Classical Era and being able to choose a culture like the Achaemenid Persians is just somewhat immersion-breaking. In the previous video about Humankind, I gave the example of Mesopotamian civilization to show how the Humankind mechanic is actually attempting to portray the historical development and changes within a civilization. In the 3rd millennium BC, Mesopotamian civilization was made up of the Sumerian city-states, followed by the kingdom of Lugal-Zagyasi of Umma and Uruk, followed by the Akkadian empire of Sargon of Akkad. Down to the 2nd millennium, you have the old Babylonian empire of Hammurabi, who was ethnically an Amorite ruler rather than a native Sumerian or Akkadian, and then of course you had the Kassite dynasty of Babylonia, amongst other kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar was also of a different ethnicity of the previous dynasts during the 1st millennium, in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, but all of these dynasties and kingdoms and city-states and rulers that I just mentioned, who were all different from each other ethnically and somewhat culturally, they all did have something in common. They were all members of Mesopotamian civilization, right? The development of Mesopotamian civilization over time. It totally makes sense for cultures and civilizations to morph as they progress through time, but your choice of culture needs to somehow be limited to avoid jarring shifts, like from the Zhou to the Achaemenid Persians. If you choose a Chinese culture, for example, let's say you choose the Shang for the Ancient Era, or the Jia, or the Zhou. And then when you progress to the Classical Era, you can choose from cultures like, I don't know, the Jin, the Han, or the Qin. And you are barred from choosing cultures like the Achaemenids, the Maya, or the Romans, for example. I also feel like certain culture shifts should occur if a lot of your outposts and administrative centers are sacked. It did feel a bit weird when my neighbors, the Olmec, shifted and became the Huns in the Classical Era. I feel like cultures like the Huns, for example, should arise if perhaps a local culture is able to sack some of your centers and they eventually take over the government, adopt your culture, and become the new dynasty. We see this many times in history, like with the Mongols in China with the Yuan dynasty, the Kassites in Mesopotamia with the Kassite dynasty, etc. In any case, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about Humankind today. I feel like it's an excellent game that has many interesting mechanics that are more advanced than those in Civilization, but I do also feel like the game still needs work. If you enjoy videos about the historical Total Wars and their mods, as well as other history-based strategy games like Civilization or Humankind or Crusader Kings, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.